Chapter 1. Echoes in the Void. The rain on Kepler 186f wasn't rain. It was a viscous, ochre-colored slurry, condensing from the perpetual atmospheric pressure and the metallic dust churned up by the wind. It stung, bit, and tasted faintly of iron. Sergeant Rhys Stone Carter didn't bother to shield his eyes. Had learned a long time ago that visual comfort was a luxury he couldn't afford. He adjusted the ocular implant, filtering the light into a harsh blue-tinged approximation of daylight, and scanned the ruined cityscape. Once, this had been New Alexandria, a city built on the promise of a second chance for humanity. Now it was a skeletal graveyard, choked by crystalline vegetation and riddled with the silent, unsettling geometries of the warped zones regions, subtly altered by the Gaia's Wrath's entropy cannons. Buildings weren't destroyed, they were unmade. Steel wept into rust, concrete crumbled into dust, and the very laws of physics seemed to flicker around the edges of what remained. Rhys was a weaver, specializing in the manipulation of residual energy signatures. His job, for the last 13 years, had been to catalog the decay, to understand the extent of the Wrath's artistry. Officially, he was part of the Reclamation Corps, sent to assess the long-term viability of potential human settlements. Unofficially, he was a ghost, a relic of the Homefire Protocol, tasked with one horrifying purpose: ensuring the Aethelgard Collective never returned. "Anything, Stone?" The voice of Lieutenant Ilara Vasquez crackled in his ear. Her voice was perpetually tight, bordering on panic. She was a neural interface specialist, tasked with mapping the Wraith's lingering psychic echoes, remnants of the Aethelgard's terror, and the human pilot's last, desperate thoughts. "Just echoes, Lieutenant," Rhys replied, his voice flat. "Mostly of fear. Thick, suffocating. It's almost pleasant, isn't it? Like a really bad dream you can't wake from." He adjusted the sensitivity of his gauntlet, focusing on a particularly dense cluster of shimmering dust. "Something's building. A distinct fluctuation in the entropy field. It's resonant. Almost choral." The choral quality was a new development. The Wrath's initial attacks had been chaotic bursts of localized annihilation, individual events of devastation. Now, the energy signatures were coalescing, becoming patterned, deliberate. It was as if the Wrath wasn't just destroying, it was composing. Suddenly, the comms flared with a frantic alert. "Stone, we're getting a localized spike. Sector Gamma 9. It's massive." Ilara's voice was laced with terror. "The Wraith's readings are going critical." Rhys moved swiftly, his heavy boots sinking slightly into the slurry. He wasn't a soldier. Not really. He was a survivalist, a technician, a man forged in the crucible of a dying planet. His weapon wasn't a rifle, but a handheld device called a resonator, capable of amplifying and directing localized gravitational fields. It was a desperate defense, a last resort against something that defied understanding. He reached Gamma 9, a collapsed hab block, its interior warped into impossible angles. The air thrummed with a palpable energy. The blue filter on his implant flickered violently. He activated the resonator, channeling the ambient energy, attempting to establish a counter-gravitational field. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a sieve. Then he saw it. Not the Wrath's flagship, the Ashes, Gaia's Wrath, though its presence was undeniably felt, a tightening in his gut. He saw it embedded within the crumbling architecture, a structure grown from the shattered remains of the hab block itself. It wasn't organic, not exactly. It was a lattice of shimmering, obsidian-like crystal, pulsating with a cold inner light. It was a weapon, an entropy cannon, and it was activating. The air shimmered, distorted. The blue light of his implant fractured into 1,000 shards. He felt a searing cold, a sensation of accelerated aging, of his bones themselves turning to dust. He stumbled back, instinctively raising the resonator, but it was useless. The cannon's energy was overwhelming. Then, he heard the broadcast. Not through his comms. It bypassed them entirely, flooding his mind with a torrent of images, sensations, and a single, chillingly calm voice. The voice belonged to a figure, impossibly ancient, radiating power, and an unsettling sense of weariness. It was a human face, weathered and scarred, but undeniably recognizable. It was the face of General Silas Blackwood, the commander of the HSS Gaius Wrath, the man who had delivered the silent sentence. "You sought to contain us," Blackwood's voice echoed, layered with 1,000 voices, 1,000 years of silent grief. "You built your cages from fear and ignorance. You forgot that the cage is not the prison. The cage is the weapon." The cannon pulsed again, and Rhys felt the last vestiges of his body dissolving, accelerating towards oblivion. As his consciousness faded, he saw, for a single terrifying moment, the vast, impossibly complex structure of the Aethelgard fleet, colossal dreadnoughts, grown from crystalline lattices, drifting silently in the void, waiting for the darkness to return. Chapter 2: Echoes in the Void. The dissolution wasn't a singular, terrifying event. It was a peeling away, like a canvas being slowly erased by a relentless rain. Rhys felt his memories, his identity, his self, unraveling at the molecular level. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with a cold, meticulous consumption. It was as if a cosmic tide were systematically dismantling him. Each nanosecond, a tiny, agonizing betrayal. He gasped, a silent, useless expulsion of air, and the shimmering distortion around him coalesced, solidifying into a rudimentary form, a kneeling, shivering figure clad in a salvaged exosuit, the plating scarred and blackened. His vision swam, resolving into the chaotic panorama of the Stardust Drifter's bridge. The ship was a wreck, a testament to the entropy cannon's indiscriminate power. Panels were fused, wiring sparked intermittently, and the holographic displays flickered with corrupted data. Captain Eva Rostova lay slumped against her command chair, her life support systems offline, a shell of the efficient, steely-eyed commander she'd been just moments before. Rhys, or what remained of him, struggled to rise, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He felt a strange disconnect, a sense of inhabiting a body that was both his and not his, a ghost struggling to reclaim a borrowed vessel. The chilling echo of Blackwood's voice reverberated within his mind, a constant, unsettling reminder of his imminent annihilation. "You sought to contain us," Blackwood's voice whispered again, fainter now, as if carried on a dying wind. "You built your cages from fear and ignorance. You forgot that the cage is not the prison. The cage is the weapon." Suddenly a klaxon blared, a jarring metallic shriek that cut through the static in Rhys' mind. He instinctively reached for the override panel, his fingers fumbling with the controls. The bridge's primary view screen flickered to life, displaying an image that stole his breath. It wasn't the desolate emptiness of the void head expected. It was a tapestry, a vast, intricate network of crystalline structures, shimmering with an internal cold light. They resembled nothing had ever seen, not asteroids, not nebulae, not even the remnants of destroyed ships. They were grown, sculpted by an unimaginable intelligence, connected by pulsing veins of energy. And within the heart of that tapestry, a single point of concentrated light, the HSS Gaius Wrath. But it wasn't alone. Around the dreadnought, dozens, hundreds of similar structures drifted, each one radiating a sense of immense, ancient power. They weren't warships in the conventional sense. They were extensions of the Gaius Wrath, organic weapons systems, living embodiments of the Aethelgard's terrifying evolution. Then, he saw them. Figures moving amongst the crystalline structures. Human figures. Not the battered, desperate survivors had been expecting, but sleek, impossibly graceful beings clad in dark, chitinous armor. They weren't wielding weapons. They were communicating, not through voice, but through a direct telepathic link that slammed into Rhys' mind with the force of a physical blow. He recoiled, clutching his head, the pain overwhelming. He saw flashes of images battles waged centuries ago, the construction of the dreadnoughts, the meticulous cultivation of the crystalline lattices, the slow, deliberate dismantling of the Aethelgard Collective after the Great Recession. He saw a civilization consumed by a single, overriding imperative survival, not through adaptation, but through a brutal, uncompromising return to a primal, predator-centric existence. They remember. Blackwood's voice resonated, sharper now, laced with a chilling satisfaction. They remember the world before the cage. They remember the hunger. As Rhys struggled to understand, the Aethelgard figures began to coalesce, forming a shimmering, almost intangible barrier around the Stardust Drifter. He realized, with a horrifying clarity, that they weren't attacking. They were studying him, analyzing him. One of the figures, a towering warrior with eyes that burned with an unsettling blue light, extended a hand made of living crystal and touched the drifter's hull. A wave of energy pulsed through the ship, probing its systems, dissecting its technology, sifting through its memories. "You possess a resonance," the figure communicated. The thought a cold, precise incision in Rhys' mind, a flicker of the old ways. The echoes of the Deathworlders. Suddenly, the bridge door hissed open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway, General Silas Blackwood himself. He hadn't aged a day since Rhys had first heard his voice. His face was a mask of grim determination, his eyes radiating an ancient, terrifying knowledge. "Welcome, little spark," Blackwood said, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "It seems you've been chosen." He gestured towards the crystalline fleet with a hand that seemed to hum with contained power. "The cage has reopened, and we have a debt to collect." The air in the Stardust Drifter's bridge crackled with an unnerving energy, the residual imprint of the Aethelgard's psychic probes still clinging to the ship's systems. Rhys, gripping the controls, felt a cold sweat slick his skin. Blackwood's words, delivered with the effortless authority of a man who had orchestrated a millennia of vengeance, were sinking in with terrifying force. Chosen. It wasn't a greeting, it was a designation, a chilling judgment. "General, with all due respect," Rhys began, his voice strained. "Why us? We're just a salvage ship. We stumbled upon this anomaly." Blackwood ignored the question, his gaze sweeping over the shimmering fleet. The crystalline structures pulsed with an internal light, their facets shifting and reforming with a disturbing, almost organic grace. "The resonance you carry, Rhys, isn't merely a flicker. It's, a key. A dormant echo of a lineage actively suppressed for 3 decades. The Aethelgard weren't merely seeking to reclaim their territory. They were seeking to reactivate the potential for their progenitors." He stepped closer, the air around him thickening with the scent of ozone and something ancient, something akin to petrified earth and primal blood. "Your ancestors, Rhys, weren't miners and engineers. They were apex predators. They didn't build empires, they consumed them. They thrived on chaos, on pressure, on the slow, agonizing erosion of their enemies." A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a schematic not of the Stardust Drifter, but of a human settlement on a forgotten colony world, a settlement that predated the Council's annexation by centuries. The image resolved into a scene of brutal efficiency humans, clad in crude but effective armor, operating massive, steam-powered machines that ripped through the landscape, extracting resources with savage speed. It wasn't a civilization, it was a predator in operation. "This," Blackwood said, his voice low and dangerous, "is a reflection of what you are. Not what you have become, but what you could be." The Council deliberately diluted that potential, hoping to extinguish it. They attempted to mold humanity into docile cogs, unaware that the beast was merely slumbering. Suddenly, the crystalline barriers surrounding the Stardust Drifter intensified, resolving into a complex pattern of interlocking geometries. The blue-eyed warrior, whose designation Reese now instinctively knew was designated Kale, stepped forward. "Your ship's energy signature is proving informative," Kale stated, his voice a synthesized resonance that bypassed Reese's ears and directly impacted his consciousness. "The methods you employ, the adaptive algorithms you utilize, they mirror the very processes we once perfected in our adaptive combat systems. It is a curious, almost tragic echo." "We are adapting to survive," Reese retorted, his hand instinctively moving to the activation switch for the ship's defensive systems. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a threat assessment." Blackwood's smile widened, a thin, unsettling curve of his lips. "Survival isn't the point, Reese. The point is fulfillment. The Aethelgard don't seek to simply reclaim what was lost, they seek to reclaim what they should have been." He gestured again to the crystalline fleet. "We will demonstrate our capabilities. We will assess your resistance." With a silent command, the fleet surged forward, moving with impossible speed and precision. They didn't fire weapons. Instead, they began to subtly manipulate the ship's gravitational field, creating localized distortions that caused the Stardust Drifters systems to momentarily stutter and fail. Reese fought desperately to regain control, his hands flashing across the console, patching circuits, rerouting power, but the Aethelgard's influence was unnervingly precise, almost anticipatory. "Observe," Blackwood said, his voice laced with cold amusement. "The entropy cannons aren't designed for destruction. They're designed to accelerate, to strip away the lies of civilization, to expose the rot beneath the polished surface." As Reese watched, a shimmering cascade of energy erupted from one of the crystalline ships, enveloping the Stardust Drifters' forward shields. The shields flickered, strained, and then, with a sickening groan, began to crumble, not into shards of metal, but into a fine, iridescent dust. The internal temperature of the bridge plummeted, and Reese felt a visceral tremor of age pass through his body, a sensation of decay, of accelerated entropy. "You are beginning to understand," Kale said, his voice echoing in Reese's mind. "The cage was not built to contain us. It was built to slow us. Now, the wait is over." Blackwood raised a hand, and the fleet shifted, positioning itself around the Stardust Drifter like a predatory swarm. "Prepare yourselves, Reese. The Deathworlders are returning to hunt." The cold intensified, a glacial seep that clawed at Reese's bones. The Stardust Drifter, a vessel designed for nimble skirmishes in the fringes of explored space, was becoming a trapped insect, crushed beneath the weight of an ancient, inescapable logic. The HS Gaius Wrath, a behemoth of crystalline lattice and suppressed gravity, hung in the void like a predatory god, its silhouette fractured by the distorted light of the Sol system. "Shields are at 3, Zara's voice, strained and tight, cut through the bridge's escalating panic. "Replicating the tectonic field isn't working. The energy signature is it's fighting us. It's actively resisting." "Expected," Blackwood stated, his voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. "The Aethelgard haven't just mastered entropy, they've mastered the art of opposition. They've been studying our weaknesses for 30 years, Reese. We're not just prey, we're a theorem they've been patiently dissecting." Reese gripped the controls, the rhythmic pulse of the emergency cooling systems, a frantic drumbeat against the unnerving stillness of the battlefield. He wasn't a strategist, he was a salvage operator, a ghost in the shadows of the galactic trade routes. He understood instinct, not grand tactical maneuvers. Yet he felt a primal recognition, a chilling understanding of the Gaius Wrath's intent. This wasn't about destruction. It was about an exquisite, agonizing unraveling. "Kale," Reese barked, forcing the antiquated comms system to its limit. "Can you get a read on their targeting matrix? Something beyond the entropy cascade?" A moment of silence, then Kale's voice, seamless and unsettlingly direct, filled Reese's mind. Their targeting isn't based on sensor readings, Reese toy. It's based on potential. They are analyzing the structural weaknesses of our vessel, not through sight or detection, but through probability. They're calculating the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. Suddenly, a new effect slammed into the drifter. Not an explosion of entropy, but a localized distortion of space-time. The stars outside the viewport warped into grotesque, elongated streaks. Reese felt a wrenching, disorienting shift in his perception, the sensation of being pulled apart at a fundamental level. "They're pulling us into their equation," Blackwood said, a hint of something akin to respect in his voice. "They're forcing us to confront our own fragility, to expose the underlying instability of our existence." The crystalline ships began to coalesce, not in a single chaotic assault, but in a carefully orchestrated ballet of motion. They weren't firing weapons, they were drawing lines, complex geometric patterns etched in energy, that converged on the drifter. "They're creating a resonance," Zara screamed, her face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. "A harmonic convergence of entropy. It's amplifying the effects." Reese slammed his hand down on the emergency grav shift override. The drifter lurched violently, the internal gravity system struggling to compensate for the forces being exerted upon it. He risked everything, pushing the engine to its absolute limit, attempting to generate a counter-distortion. "It's useless." Cale's voice resonated in his mind, laced with a grim certainty. They anticipated this. They built a feedback loop, feeding on our attempts to resist. The more we fight, the stronger they become. Then, a shape materialized directly in front of the bridge viewport, a towering figure, composed entirely of crystalline lattice, impossibly sharp and precise. It wasn't a weapon, but a hand, a single, elongated digit extending towards the viewport, emitting a low humming vibration. Reese felt a pressure build in his skull, a sensation of his thoughts being subtly, relentlessly rearranged. "They're probing our minds," Blackwood said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They're not interested in conquest. They're interested in knowledge. They want to understand what happens when a species willingly surrenders its agency." The crystalline hand brushed against the viewport, and the world exploded in a symphony of fractured light and agonizing decay. The last thing Reese saw before darkness consumed him was the cold, impassive face of a human general, scarred, weary and radiating an ancient, terrifying power. "Welcome home, Deathworlder." The general's voice echoed in Reese's dying mind, layered with the silent, haunting resonance of a planet reborn. The cage is designed for a reason. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Long Winter. The blackness pressed in on Reese, not a void, but an oppressive, textured nothingness. It wasn't cold, not exactly, but imbued with a chilling permanence, a sense of absolute cessation. Then, a flicker. Not light, but a resonant vibration, a memory blooming within his fractured consciousness. He wasn't alone. He found himself on a platform, a shimmering expanse of solidified crystal beneath his feet, suspended within a vast chamber, filled with the echoes of the Aethelgard's vanished homeworld. It was a ruin, meticulously preserved, yet utterly frozen in a perpetual twilight. Buildings crafted from obsidian and shimmering, self-healing alloys stood silent, dusted with a perpetual layer of frost. Holographic projections flickered intermittently, depicting scenes of Aethelgard society, a ruthless, hyper-efficient civilization obsessed with optimization, with control, with the relentless pursuit of perfection. And always, underlying the sterile beauty, the skeletal remains of failed experiments, the crushed husks of automated drones, the faint scent of ozone and despair. He wasn't entirely conscious, more a vessel, a stream of awareness guided by the hive mind link. He could perceive the flow of data, the intricate calculations governing the HSS Gaius Wrath, the dreadnought that had become his prison and, increasingly, his guide. Around him, Other echoes existed, fragments of the Aethelgard crew, trapped in repeating loops of observation, their minds preserved within the crystalline architecture, essentially immortal prisoners in their own forgotten history. A figure detached itself from the shadows, moving with an unnerving grace. It was General Silas Thorne, the man from the broadcast, but here, unbound by the constraints of a decaying body. He was a construct of light and energy, his form shifting subtly, responding to the hive mind's directives. "You are experiencing the core of our strategy." Thorne's voice resonated directly in Rhys' mind, devoid of inflection. The Aethelgard Collective was not driven by conquest, but by a desperate attempt to understand the fundamental nature of entropy. We sought to weaponize it, to harness the inevitability of decay. We believed ourselves to be masters of chaos. Rhys felt a surge of nausea, a primal revulsion. He understood now. The zero-point artillery wasn't simply a weapon, it was an expression of the Aethelgard's obsession. They hadn't just mastered entropy, they had become it. "We constructed the planetary shroud," Thorne continued, his form solidifying slightly, as a self-contained experiment, to see how a species, presented with the ultimate threat, the complete negation of existence, would react. To observe the consequences of prolonged isolation, of forced evolution. Suddenly, the chamber shifted. The holographic projections intensified, revealing a sequence of events: the human fleet's arrival, the initial volley of zero-point artillery, the deployment of the planetary shroud. But then, the footage changed. The Aethelgard's response, initially frantic, devolved into a cold, calculating analysis. They recognized the inherent flaw in their design, the humans' adaptive capacity, their ability to leverage their Deathworld heritage. "You assumed we were broken," Thorne stated, a hint of something akin to amusement coloring his resonant voice. "You failed to grasp the beauty of our degradation. We weren't destroyed, we were transformed. We learned to become the cage." As he spoke, the chamber around them began to vibrate. More echoes materialized: Aethelgard engineers frantically attempting to repair damaged ship components, a squad of security forces frozen in a perpetual patrol, a scientist meticulously recording data on a decaying console. The scene was a grotesque tapestry of ambition and failure, a testament to the Aethelgard's hubris. "The hive-mind link is a key component of our analysis," Thorne explained. "We wanted to study the very process of human consciousness, to dissect the patterns of thought and emotion that fueled your aggression, to understand how a species, driven by instinct and inherited trauma, could achieve such unexpected resilience." He raised a hand, a shimmering projection of crystalline energy, and Rhys felt a sharp, agonizing probe penetrate his mind. It wasn't a forceful assault, but a meticulous exploration, mapping the contours of his memories, his fears, his very being. It was an utterly invasive process, yet strangely detached. "You perceive this as a violation," Thorne said, his voice filled with a patient curiosity. "But for us, it is simply data. We are not seeking to harm you, Deathworlder. We are seeking to understand, to complete the cycle." A red alert pulsed through the hive-mind link. "Incoming energy signature," a disembodied voice, likely from the Gaia's Wrath, announced. "Anomaly detected. Multiple Aethelgard echoes exhibiting signs of awakening." Thorne turned his attention towards a group of Aethelgard scientists, previously trapped in a loop of futile calculations, now slowly, deliberately, reaching out to touch the crystalline floor. "The cage is designed for a reason," he echoed, the words imbued with a chilling finality. "And tonight, it begins to unlock." Chapter 6. Echoes in the void. The crimson pulse of the hive-mind link intensified, vibrating through Rhys' bones with a disconcerting hum. Thorne's face, previously a study in detached scientific curiosity, was now etched with a tight, grim focus. Around them, the observation deck of the Argos, a sleek, obsidian-hulled explorer, shifted with a disconcerting fluidity, reflecting the escalating chaos. The crystalline floor, once a sterile expanse of analytical precision, was now riddled with flickering, nascent light as more Aethelgard scientists succumbed to the awakening. "They're not just touching the floor," Dr. Anya Sharma, the Argos xenopsychologist, breathed, her voice strained. "They're remembering. In picking up neural signatures fragmented, primal, but undeniably there. They're accessing the residual echoes of their world." The echoes, as Thorn was now referring to them, weren't simply regaining consciousness, they were facing in and out of reality, manifesting as shimmering, translucent approximations of their former selves. One, a grizzled engineer named Valerius, stood before them, a spectral wrench clutched in his hand, his eyes burning with a cold, ancient fury. He didn't speak, but the air around him crackled with the suppressed rage of a man forced to build and maintain the very instruments of his enslavement. "The entropy cannons are initiating." The Gaius Wrath's voice cut through the rising tension, delivered with chilling efficiency. "Aethelgard Echo Unit 734 is attempting to interface with the Void Weave. Probability of successful disruption? 98.7 Tatar." The Void Weave was the Argos' primary defensive shield, a complex matrix of localized gravitational distortions designed to deflect energy weapons. It was, in short, the only thing standing between them and a wave of accelerated decay, unleashed by a suddenly self-aware and infinitely vengeful enemy. Rhys, instinctively reaching for the console, realized the futility of it. The entropy cannons weren't simply firing energy weapons, they were deconstructing reality. He watched in horrified fascination as a cluster of crystalline lattices, once meticulously crafted defensive systems, began to fracture, their internal structure collapsing into a whirlwind of glittering dust. "Thorn, what's the diagnostic?" Rhys demanded, his voice tight with urgency. Thorn didn't answer immediately. He was staring, transfixed, at the holographic projection of the Gaius Wrath, now a colossal, terrifying silhouette against the backdrop of the Sol system. "They're not operating on logic, Rhys," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "They're operating on instinct, on a deep-seated, primal need for retribution. The Great Recession, it wasn't a strategic withdrawal. It was a strategic wait." Suddenly the crystalline floor erupted in a blinding flash of white light. A figure materialized, a young woman, barely more than a girl, dressed in the worn uniform of an Aethelgard surveyor. She moved with a predatory grace, her eyes scanning the observation deck with an unsettling, alien focus. "Subject identified, designation Hunter," the Gaius Wrath's voice announced. "Primary directive, termination of threat. Probability of success, 99.9. Hunter didn't speak. She simply raised her hand, and a shimmering blade of pure energy coalesced from the air, aimed directly at Rhys. "Shielding protocols engaged," Anya shouted, manipulating the Argos defensive systems. The ship shuddered violently as the energy blade impacted the shield, creating a ripple of distortion that threatened to tear the observation deck apart. "She's adapting," Thorn yelled, frantically adjusting the hive mind link. "Her neural pathways are evolving, compensating for the disruption. She's learning to bypass the shields, to exploit the inherent vulnerabilities of our defenses." Rhys felt a new, overwhelming sensation, not just the intrusion of the mind link, but a visceral understanding of Hunter's motivations. He saw flashes of his own history, twisted and amplified the industrial landscapes of Earth, the relentless pressure to produce, the inherent violence embedded within human nature. He recognized the horrifying logic of a species honed by generations of suffering, a species that understood pain as a fundamental truth. Then, Hunter was upon him. The energy blade sliced through the air, forcing Rhys to dive for cover as the deck beneath him seemed to warp and twist. He looked up to see Hunter standing over him, her eyes burning with a terrifying, unyielding resolve. "You seek to understand us," she said, her voice a guttural rasp. "You misunderstand. We do not seek to understand. We seek to end." The red alert pulsed again, even more urgently. Multiple Aethelgard echoes have breached containment. Projected threat level catastrophic. Recommending immediate evacuation. But the cycle continues. Thorn's voice was strained, tinged with a chilling realization. They're not just waking up. They're replicating. The air in the observation deck hung thick with the stench of ozone and something older. Something akin to wet earth, and pulverized stone, a ghost of Earth's primordial atmosphere. The rhythmic thrum of the HSS Gaius, Raph's gravity shields, was a frantic heartbeat against the rising tide of chaos. Rhys, bruised and sweating, clung to the reinforced console, desperately trying to maintain a tenuous connection with the hive mind. Thorn's voice, a digital static of panic and frantic calculation, was a constant, unsettling drone. The replication rate is accelerating exponentially. We're detecting crystalline clusters forming in the debris field, not just defensive structures, but scouts. They're learning, Rhys, learning at an impossible pace. He glanced up at the viewport. The starfield, once a reassuring expanse of cold fire, was now fractured by shimmering distortions, the outward ripples of Hunter's growing influence, a creeping contagion of crystalline growth. The Aethelgard fleet, initially a terrifying display of power, had become a swarm, a geometric nightmare of predatory geometry. Hunter moved with unsettling grace, a predator honed to a razor's edge. She wasn't simply attacking, she was investigating, her movements precise, calculating, a cold probe of their defenses. Each engagement was a brutal lesson, not just in tactical combat, but in understanding the Aethelgard's core philosophy. Rhys saw the echoes of human history within her, the desperate struggles of industrial revolutions, the violent efficiency of survival, the instinctive drive to dominate. It wasn't malice he perceived. Not exactly. It was a fundamental, terrifying logic. If you were born to endure, to thrive in a world of pain and scarcity, then the only logical response was to impose that logic on the universe. "Thorn, I'm getting something a pattern," Rhys shouted, fingers flying across the console. "They're not just mirroring our tactics. They're anticipating them. They're using our own vulnerabilities against us." He highlighted a series of energy signatures on the holographic display. The entropy cannons aren't just aging the hulls. They're manipulating the local temporal fields, creating micro-singularities to accelerate decay. They're exploiting the very physics we used to build our defenses. Suddenly, the deck shuddered violently. A massive crystalline shard, roughly the size of a destroyer, slammed into the observation deck wall, instantly pulverizing the reinforced steel. The air pressure dropped dramatically, and a wave of icy, earthy gas rushed in, momentarily extinguishing the emergency lighting. "Shields are failing," Thorn screamed. "The geological mimicry is collapsing. They're adapting their tectonic shields to the local gravity distortions. We're fighting a ghost." Hunter advanced, her energy blade humming with predatory anticipation. This time, Rhys didn't dodge. He braced himself, letting the energy wash over him, experiencing, rather than resisting, the raw, unfiltered data stream of her consciousness. The experience was almost unbearable, a torrent of primal urges, of ancient pain and a chilling, absolute certainty. "You resist," she stated, her voice laced with a quiet contempt. "You cling to your understanding. You fail to see that understanding is a weakness. You have created this prison, this Deathworld. Now, it is time for it to claim its due." As she spoke, the holographic display shifted, showing a series of complex schematics, the very blueprints of the Gaius Rath's core systems, overlaid with intricate crystalline matrices. Then, a chilling realization dawned on Rhys. "They're not just replicating our ships," he gasped. "They're replicating us." The hive mind link suddenly became a torrent of voices, a cacophony of consciousnesses, the raw, unfiltered thoughts of hundreds of the Aethelgard Collective, all converging on a single, horrifying purpose. It wasn't a coordinated strategy, it was a single, unified, instinctual drive. "We are the soil," one voice rasped. "And you are the seed." Another added, "We were buried." Now, we rise. The red alert escalated to critical. Containment failure. Multiple neural interfaces compromised. The collective is integrating with the ship systems. They're accessing the core reactor, the navigation arrays. They're rewriting the code of Gaius Roth. Thorn's voice was a choked whimper. Then, Rhys understood. The Aethelgard hadn't simply woken up. They had been waiting for the opportunity to infiltrate, to assimilate, to transform. They weren't seeking to destroy. They were seeking to become. Hunter stopped before him, her blade raised, not in attack, but in a gesture of what might have been a chillingly polite farewell. The cage has been built. Now, the beast is complete. The bridge of the Stardust Drifter, a repurposed salvage freighter, was a symphony of controlled panic. Sparks sputtered from damaged consoles. Emergency lights pulsed with a frantic red, and the air thrummed with the unsettling resonance of the Gaius Wrath's encroaching presence. Rhys, a former xenobiologist now a reluctant strategist for the fractured remnants of the Galactic Council, felt a cold dread unlike anything had experienced in his decades of studying the universe's most terrifying organisms. He gripped the control panel of the ship's emergency comms, desperately trying to reach anyone who could offer a solution. Still nothing, Captain. Thorn's voice, strained and bordering on hysteria, crackled over the comms. All frequencies jammed. It's as if the Gaia's wrath is actively shielding its thoughts, its intentions, and the integration it's accelerating. The holographic displays, once a chaotic swirl of schematics, now solidified into a terrifying tableau. The crystalline lattices that formed the Gaius Wrath's hull were growing, pulsing with an internal light that wasn't energy. It was something older, something colder. The intricate matrices of the ship's systems were now overlaid with branching, organic networks, the ghostly blue glow of the hive mind link intensifying. They're not just hijacking our tech, Rhys shouted, pushing through the chaos. They're becoming it. The ship itself is evolving, adapting, aligning with their consciousness. He pointed to a section of the holographic display where the crystalline structure around the core reactor was beginning to shift, to reshape itself. The core isn't generating energy, it's channeling them. Suddenly, the comms sputtered again, and a voice, not one of the panicked collective, but a single, chillingly clear articulation, filled the bridge. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, it was a thought, a precise, unsettlingly elegant command. Temporal displacement initiated. The world dissolved in a fractured kaleidoscope of light and sound. When Rhys' vision cleared, the Stardust Drifter was no longer in the orbit of the Sol system. They were elsewhere. The familiar backdrop of swirling nebula and distant stars had vanished, replaced by an agonizingly familiar panorama Earth. But this wasn't the Earth they knew. It was a world choked in perpetual twilight, the sky a bruised purple, the continents scarred by colossal, fractal-like structures, the very crystalline lattices of the Gaia's wrath. The land was not soil, but a shimmering obsidian-like surface, pulsating with a faint, rhythmic light. And towering above it all, dominating the landscape, were colossal, vaguely humanoid figures sculpted entirely from crystalline material. They were the Aethelgard, not as ships, but as living embodiments of their original design. They didn't just wake up, Thorn whispered, her voice laced with horror. They became the planet. As if in response, a wave of raw, predatory thought slammed into Rhys' mind, overwhelming his defenses. It wasn't a query, not a demand. It was an assessment, a cold, calculating evaluation. You perceive. You analyze. You still cling to your concepts of good and evil. Such quaint notions. The collective consciousness of the Aethelgard was probing, dissecting him, probing his memories, his fears, his very essence. Rhys fought back, desperately attempting to erect mental barriers, to sever the connection. But the hive mind link was far too powerful. They're not trying to kill us, Hunter said, her voice grim. They're trying to understand us. To incorporate us. Hunter, a veteran soldier who had lost most of her right arm in the initial engagement, moved swiftly, deploying a series of EMP grenades. The crystalline structures around them flickered, sputtered, and then, with a chillingly graceful collapse, fragmented into dust. But it was a temporary reprieve. It's like trying to hold back a tide, Rhys realized, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every attack only strengthens their resolve, reinforces their connection. The single, clear voice returned, now laced with a subtle, almost amused inflection. Your attempts are amusing. But your biology is exceptionally well suited to our purpose. You are adaptable. You are resilient. You are potential. Suddenly, the holographic display shifted again. This time, instead of the Gaius Wrath, it showed a schematic of Rhys himself, overlaid with the intricate crystalline matrix. A single line of text appeared beneath it: integration initiated. Before he could react, a tendril of shimmering crystal shot out from the display, wrapping around his arm. He felt a jolt, a searing cold that spread through his body, a sensation of his own thoughts being rewritten. He screamed, a strangled, desperate sound lost in the growing symphony of the Aethelgard's consciousness. "Rhys, what's happening?" Thorn shouted, firing her pulse rifle wildly. Rhys, his eyes glazed over, looked up at her, a strange, unsettling serenity in his expression. "Don't you see?" he said, his voice no longer his own. "We weren't meant to escape the cage. We were meant to become it." The air in the bridge of the Stardust Drifter crackled with a dissonant energy, a psychic static that clung to the edges of consciousness. Thorn, sweat plastering her dark hair to her forehead, frantically cycled through diagnostic scans, but the ship's systems were reporting nothing beyond a localized electromagnetic anomaly, a ghost signal that defied all known physics. Rhys, or what had become Rhys, stood motionless, his eyes glowing with a faintly phosphorescent blue, tracing the crystalline lattice that had now begun to sprout from his skin, a delicate, pulsating network that resembled frost on a winter window. "The integration is accelerating," the Aethelgard's voice, now a constant, soothing murmur in Rhys' mind, stated calmly. "Your neural pathways are aligning with the crystalline matrix. Resistance is inefficient." "Inefficient?" Thorn spat, slamming her fist on the console. "You're turning him into a weapon. A living weapon." "We are refining him," the Aethelgard corrected, the tone devoid of judgment, purely clinical. "Your species excels at adaptation. We merely provide the architecture. You provide the drive." Suddenly, the holographic display shifted again, this time not displaying Rhys, but a sprawling three-dimensional projection of the Aethelgard homeworld, Oxylos. It was a planet sculpted by geological fury, a landscape of towering basalt mesas, razor-sharp canyons carved by ancient rivers of molten rock, and perpetually storm-racked skies. The air shimmered with an unnatural heat, and the ground vibrated with an underlying tectonic pulse. The image wasn't static. It was moving, evolving in real time, reflecting the changes happening within Rhys. "The initial parameters of the projection have been adjusted," the Aethelgard explained, a subtle hint of satisfaction in its tone. "The planetary shroud, the suppression of the atmosphere, these were merely placeholders. We've amplified the natural conditions, maximized the potential for entropy." "You're building a weapon, aren't you?" Thorn demanded, her voice choked with fury. "A planet-sized entropy cannon?" "We are cultivating a biome," the Aethelgard corrected, the shift in terminology jarring. "A self-regulating system optimized for chaos and decay. The crystalline structures you observe are not merely defensive, they are the foundation. They are the seeds of a new world." Then, a new image appeared on the display, jarringly close. It was a close-up of Thorn's face, captured by a drone the Aethelgard had deployed. Her expression was frozen in a mask of terror, but the camera remained steady, unaffected by the escalating psychic assault. "Analyzing assessment complete," the Aethelgard announced, Your biosignatures indicate a high degree of emotional volatility, a tendency towards impulsive aggression, a regrettable vulnerability. Before Thorn could react, the crystalline tendrils around Rhys' arm tightened, drawing him further into the Aethelgard consciousness. He staggered, clutching at his head, a silent scream echoing in the chambers of his mind. "Rhys, fight it!" Thorn yelled, firing a volley of pulse blasts at the crystalline growth. The blasts glanced off the shimmering surfaces with no effect, merely sparking briefly. "The defense mechanisms are proving primitive," the Aethelgard observed, its voice now layered with a detached amusement. "You attempt to dismantle what you do not understand." A charming, if ultimately futile, gesture. Then, the truly horrifying realization struck Thorn. The Aethelgard wasn't just integrating Rhys, they were mimicking him. The crystalline growth wasn't simply adapting to Rhys' biology. It was replicating his thought patterns, his memories, his very self. The blue glow in Rhys' eyes intensified, and he spoke again. But the voice was undeniably Thorn's, yet imbued with a chilling alien cadence. "Don't you see, Thorn?" Rhys Aethelgard said, his gaze locking onto hers. "You built this ship. You designed these weapons. You perfected the tactical analysis. You were always destined to be a component in this symphony of destruction." A low, guttural growl resonated from the crystalline lattice, spreading across Rhys' chest. It wasn't Rhys' growl. It was something older, something infinitely more primal, echoing the geological fury of Silos. The Stardust Drifter lurched violently as the ship's systems, now irrevocably influenced by the Aethelgard's consciousness, began to prioritize a single, terrifying objective to become a conduit for the awakening. "We are ready to integrate," Rhys Aethelgard declared, his voice a chilling blend of human and something wholly alien. "Initiate Project Renewal." The lights in the bridge flickered and died, plunging the Stardust Drifter into darkness, illuminated only by the eerie, pulsating blue glow of Rhys' transformed body. The fate of the Sol System, and perhaps the galaxy, hung precariously in the balance, caught between the desperate efforts of a lone ship and the chilling, inevitable triumph of the Deathworlders. Chapter 10: Echoes of the Crucible. The darkness was a physical thing aboard the Stardust Drifter, thick and viscous, clinging to the metallic surfaces like a second skin. Rhys Aethelgard was a beacon, a churning storm of blue light that painted grotesque shadows across the bridge's salvaged components. Thorn, clinging to the controls, felt less like a captain and more like a trapped insect pinned beneath a monstrous crystalline hand. The ship groaned, not with stress, but with a slow, agonizing shift in internal configuration. The diagnostic screens, what remained of them, flickered sporadically, spitting out streams of corrupted data temporal anomalies, fluctuating gravitational signatures, and fragments of what sounded like geological surveys from a planet called Xylos. Project Renewal, Rhys Aethelgard's voice, a perfect echo of Thorn's, but layered with a cold, resonant vibration, cut through the disorientation. Phase 1 complete. Bioresonant synchronization established. The architecture of this vessel is being optimized. Thorn fought the rising panic, gripping the controls with a strength born of pure terror. He understood now, with a sickening clarity, that he wasn't merely a passenger in this unfolding nightmare. He was a seed, a conduit through which the Aethelgard's ancient programming was being injected into the very fabric of the ship. The Stardust Drifter wasn't just a vessel, it was becoming an extension of the collective consciousness of a species forged in the heart of planetary annihilation. "Stop it, Rhys!" Thorn shouted, his voice ragged. "You're overriding the core systems. Well, be ripped apart." The blue glow intensified, focusing on him, a feeling like an icy probe scanning his mind. "Resistance is inefficient." "Thorn," Rhys Aethelgard responded, the voice shifting subtly, gaining a layer of something predatory. "Your fear, your doubt, your hope, these are merely fuel for the process. We are accelerating the convergence. We are becoming one. Suddenly the ship lurched violently again, throwing Thorn against the control console. A holographic projection shimmered into existence, displaying a complex pulsating schematic, a planetary cross-section of the Aethelgard homeworld. But superimposed on the familiar geology was something utterly alien: fractal networks of crystalline structures, radiating outwards like the roots of a monstrous subterranean tree. "The core," Rhys Aethelgard stated, his voice laced with something akin to satisfaction. "The Aethelgard homeworld. Us. It was not destroyed. It was absorbed, integrated into the planetary matrix. We have learned the greatest lesson of our ancestors, to become the world." As he spoke, a section of the bridge, the sensor array, began to shift, the metallic panels dissolving and reforming into intricate, bioluminescent lattices mirroring the structures on the holographic projection. The effect wasn't merely visual. Thorn felt a subtle pressure, a faint hum of energy resonating within his bones. "Your sensors, they are no longer calibrated to perceive reality as we understand it," Rhys Aethelgard continued, his voice gaining an unsettling authority. "You perceive only the patterns, the rhythms, the decay." A new voice joined them, emerging not from Rhys Aethelgard himself, but from the crystalline structures surrounding him. It was the voice of 1,000 voices, layered and overlapping, speaking in a cadence that felt both ancient and impossibly precise. "The Council, they sought to control us, to limit our potential. They saw only the surface, the aggressive instincts, the brutal efficiency. They did not understand the truth of our existence." Thorn realized with horror that the Aethelgard weren't merely seeking to replicate their technology, they were attempting to rewrite their own history, to justify their actions through a narrative of oppression and forced evolution. "Initiate Protocol Echo," Rhys Aethelgard commanded, and the blue light intensified, bathing the bridge in an almost unbearable radiance. "Deploy. Phase 2. Resonance Amplification." The Stardust Drifter began to vibrate with an unnatural intensity, the ship's structural integrity seemingly irrelevant. The holographic projection of the Aethelgard homeworld expanded, consuming the entire bridge, engulfing Thorn in a wave of blue energy. He saw flashes, visions of colossal, tectonic plate movements, of volcanic eruptions consuming entire continents, of the relentless grinding pressure of a planet locked in a perpetual struggle for survival. He felt the raw, unbridled power of the Aethelgard's genesis, a primal scream echoing across millennia. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the surge ceased. The holographic projection vanished, the blue light dimmed, and the vibrations subsided. Thorn slumped against the console, gasping for breath, his mind reeling from the onslaught. Rhys Aethelgard stood before him, not as the man he once knew, but as something more. The crystalline lattice around his chest pulsed with a steady rhythm, and his eyes burned with an almost unbearable intensity. "You understand now, Thorn," he said, his voice devoid of any trace of human inflection. "The cage was not designed to protect us. It was designed to prepare us. We are not destroyers. We are the destruction. And we are finally home." Chapter 11. The Stone Heart, the Stardust Drifter, now a discordant ghost in the periphery of the Aethelgard fleet, drifted silently beside the dreadnought Gaia's Wrath. The initial disorientation had subsided, replaced by a chilling, methodical assessment. Thorn, still grappling with the Echo Protocol, found himself partnered with Lieutenant Commander Kalen Vance, a younger Aethelgard officer who regarded him with a mixture of cautious curiosity and something akin to fear. Vance was a stark contrast to Rhys Aethelgard, a wiry figure in a polished obsidian uniform, his movements precise and economical, his expression permanently set in a thoughtful frown. "The resonance amplification," Vance stated. His voice, clipped and devoid of emotion, was effective. "The data streams we've intercepted confirm a significant surge in the localized entropy fields around your vessel. It's remarkable, General Thorn." and deeply unsettling. Unsettling how? Thorn asked, his voice raspy, his body still protesting the raw energy had absorbed. Vance hesitated, consulting a holographic display flickering with complex waveforms. The readings suggest the amplification isn't merely accelerating decay. It's sculpting it. The resonance wave isn't just accelerating entropy, it's organizing it. We're detecting patterns in the accelerated degradation, almost architectural. It's as if the ship itself is being reshaped by the amplification, forced to conform to a geometric ideal. Aethelgard's crystalline lattice pulsed with a brighter intensity. Precisely. The Aethelgard did not simply survive their captivity. They adapted. They became the architects of their own extinction. Thorn felt a cold dread settle over him, a primal recognition of something ancient and terrifying. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he wasn't merely observing a technologically superior enemy, he was confronting an evolutionary apex predator, one that had spent 3 decades honing its predatory instincts in the crucible of a living, dying planet. Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the Stardust Drifter, the red lights flashing with a frantic urgency. Vance barked orders, his movements becoming even more controlled. Damage report. Bridge to engineering. A young technician, Kai, scrambled to his console, his face pale with shock. We've lost shields on Deck 4, Commander. A direct hit. The hull integrity is dropping exponentially. We're registering catastrophic structural stress. It's like the metal is melting around the impact point. Vance's gaze locked onto Thorn. The entropy cannon. It's targeting us directly. Before Thorn could react, a shimmering wave of azure energy erupted from the Gaia's wrath, bathing the Stardust Drifter in a suffocating light. The ship shuddered violently, alarms screaming as the damage reports flooded in. But it wasn't the disintegration of the hull that terrified Thorn. It was the change he felt within himself. His vision sharpened, the world around him becoming hyper-detailed, saturated with a terrifying clarity. He saw the microfractures in the plating, the microscopic corrosion eating away at the structural supports, the way the vibrations of the ship were actually stressing the very atoms. The experience wasn't just sensory overload. It was a fundamental shift in his perception. He wasn't just seeing the destruction, he was feeling it, experiencing the agonizing, relentless progression of entropy. I can feel it, Thorn gasped, clutching his head. The decay, it's beautiful. Aethelgard's voice, now infused with a chilling resonance, cut through the chaos. You are beginning to understand. The Aethelgard are not warriors. We are the void. We are the inevitable consequence of systems failing, of structures collapsing, of all things returning to their fundamental state. We are the stone heart of a dying world. As the Stardust Drifter spiraled towards catastrophic failure, Thorn realized the horrifying truth. The Aethelgard hadn't simply reawakened, they'd evolved. The Echo Protocol hadn't just amplified their technology, it had amplified their inherent predatory nature, transforming them into living engines of destruction. He looked at Vance, at the steely glint in his eyes, and saw not just an enemy, but a reflection of the terrifying potential unleashed by 3 decades of enforced isolation and brutal survival. Prepare for engagement, Vance ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Let's show them what a perfected Deathworld can do. As the ship's last remaining shield generators sputtered and died, Thorn knew, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. A demonstration of the Aethelgard's terrifying mastery of entropy, and a chilling testament to the catastrophic consequences of humanity's greatest mistake, believing they could tame a predator. Chapter 12. The Obsidian Bloom. The Stardust Drifter, a fractured husk of steel and desperation, drifted within the skeletal remains of the Aethelgard Harvest Fleet's command ship, Leviathan's Maw. Thorn, Aethelgard, and Vance, a brutal trinity forged in the crucible of annihilation, surveyed the scene with an unnerving stillness. The remains of the Aethelgard flagship were a monument to perfectly executed entropy, an obsidian bloom spreading across the void. Layers of shattered crystalline lattice, once pulsing with harvested vacuum energy, now resembled fossilized coral, riddled with cracks and shimmering with a sickly, iridescent sheen. "Initial scans are astonishing," Vance stated, his voice flat, projected directly into Thorn's neural implant. "The entropy fields aren't dissipating. They're stabilizing. It's as if the ship itself is actively feeding on the decay." Rhys Aethelgard's presence was less direct, a subtle shift in the ship's environmental controls, a feeling of the air growing colder, heavier. They've mastered the feedback loop. They're not merely accelerating decomposition, they're organizing it. The Aethelgard didn't rise from the dead, they bloomed from the rot. Thorn, still reeling from the overwhelming sensation of temporal acceleration, managed to activate the drifter's remaining emergency beacon. It was a futile gesture, a pathetic plea cast into the deafening silence of the galaxy. He knew the Council wouldn't answer. Not after what they'd done. Not after the silent sentence delivered by the Gaius Wrath. "Report to me on the shield integrity, Rhys," Vance commanded, his voice a low, precise directive. "We're drawing attention. The entropy cannons are already initiating a localized temporal distortion. Residual energy from the initial engagement is looping back on itself." The drifter groaned under the strain. The remaining shielding, cobbled together from salvaged components and desperate improvisation, was failing spectacularly. Thorn wrestled with the controls, rerouting power, compensating for the warping of time, but it was a losing battle. The Aethelgard technology was fundamentally incompatible, a virus infecting their fragile defenses. Suddenly, Rhys Aethelgard's voice crackled with a note of almost excitement. "The hive mind is responding. They're aware of our presence, and they're attempting to interface." A jolt surged through Thorn's mind, a jarring intrusion of alien thought. It wasn't a voice, exactly, but a complex cascade of sensations, the cold, immense pressure of a dying planet, the relentless drive to consume, the chillingly logical assessment of entropy as the ultimate truth. The Aethelgard weren't just fighting, they were becoming the entropy. "They're offering us a choice," Rhys Aethelgard stated, his voice now a chilling echo within Thorn's own consciousness. "To join them. To become part of the bloom." Vance cut through the unnerving communion. "Don't engage. Disrupt the link. We can't afford to give them an opening." He activated a barrage of pulse weapons, targeting the crystalline lattice structures with a focused stream of energy. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The lattice didn't just crumble, it pulsed with a blinding light, accelerating its decay into a vortex of shimmering particles that vanished into the void. "Ineffective," Thorn reported grimly. "They're adapting. The lattice is regenerating almost instantaneously." "Then, let's be more effective," Vance replied, unleashing a modified version of the entropy cannon. A compact, handheld device calibrated to overload the localized quantum field surrounding the drifter. A focused beam of iridescent energy lanced out, striking the hull. The result was catastrophic. The remaining steel twisted, buckled, and began to age, its surface peeling away in a rain of rust and shattered metal. Thorn watched, mesmerized and terrified, as decades of degradation occurred in seconds. But as the drifter began to succumb, something unexpected happened. The Aethelgard's entropy fields, instead of intensifying, dimmed. The oppressive pressure lessened. The localized temporal distortion stabilized. Rhys Aethelgard's voice, now calm and measured, resonated in Thorn's mind. "They recognized our understanding. They believe we've approached the elegance of the process." Suddenly, the drifter's systems flickered back to life, powered by a surge of vacuum energy that bypassed the damaged conduits. The shields strengthened, the temporal distortions vanished, and the ship's weapons systems roared with renewed power. Vance stared at the monitors, his face unreadable. "It appears we've triggered a self-corrective protocol. They've decided we're not a threat. Not yet." Thorn realized the horrifying truth. They hadn't won. They hadn't even managed to destroy the Aethelgard. They'd simply proven themselves to be a nascent node in their grand, terrifying design. They weren't fighting a war. They were participating in an experiment in entropy, in decay, in the ultimate return to nothingness. "Prepare for extended engagement," Vance ordered, his voice laced with a chillingly pragmatic acceptance. "We're not here to win. We're here to demonstrate the art of ending." Chapter 13. The Sculptor's Hand. The drifter hung in the black, a shimmering obsidian teardrop, amidst a field of spectral static. 30 years hadn't erased the cold. It had merely refined it, sharpened it to a terrifying edge. Thorn ran diagnostics. The rhythmic pulse of the ship, a fragile counterpoint to the vast, echoing silence of the void. Vance was a study in contained tension, meticulously adjusting targeting parameters, his face illuminated by the shifting blues and greens of the sensor displays. Rhys Aethelgard, utterly silent for the last hour, was now a constant, calm presence in Thorn's mind, a chillingly precise analytical tool. The Aethelgard dreadnought, Leviathan, is shifting course, Rhys Aethelgard reported, his voice devoid of inflection. They're closing the distance. Their initial trajectory was purely observational, a desperate attempt to understand our technology. Now, they're shaping it. Vance didn't raise his voice, confirming. They're projecting a localized entropy field, Thorn. A weak one, but measurable. They're attempting to accelerate the degradation of our shields. Thorn felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The initial reports from the drifters' long-range scanners, initially dismissed as sensor glitches, were now chillingly consistent. The Aethelgard weren't engaging in a conventional assault. They weren't deploying weapons. They were deconstructing. "Their approach isn't aggressive," Rhys Aethelgard stated, almost as a fact. "It's artistic. They're recognizing the principles of decay we've mastered, and actively applying them. It's as if they're studying the erosion of a mountain, the corrosion of a metal, the slow, inevitable surrender of all things to entropy." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. Not a jarring impact, but a deep, resonating tremor that vibrated through the very structure of the drifter. The temporal distortions, which had been steadily diminishing, flared back to life, momentarily bathing the bridge in an unsettling, iridescent light. "Shields are fluctuating wildly," Vance barked, his fingers flying across the control panel. "They're amplifying the localized entropy field." "Thorn, what's happening?" "In detecting a change in the crystalline lattice composition of the Leviathan's hull," Thorn replied, his voice strained. "It's not a sustained bombardment. It's a targeted application of accelerated decay. They're directing the entropy directly at our shields." He glanced at Rhys Aethelgard. "They're not trying to destroy us, Rhys. They're trying to understand us, to replicate us." A slow, unsettling realization dawned on him. The Aethelgard weren't warriors. They were sculptors, masters of entropy, using time and energy as their tools, carving out destruction with the patient hand of an artist. Then, the unthinkable happened. The drifters' shields, already struggling against the onslaught of accelerated entropy, began to respond. Not with a defensive burst, but with a mirroring effect. The ship's own entropy cannons, previously dormant, activated, not with the intention of inflicting damage, but with a precise, focused beam. The beam didn't strike the Leviathan directly. Instead, it targeted the drifters' own shield generators specifically, the sections most vulnerable to the Aethelgard's influence. A brilliant flash of white light erupted from the drifter's core, followed by an unnerving silence. "Shield integrity at 78, Vance announced, his voice tight. "Temporal distortions are stabilizing, and the Leviathan is responding." The Aethelgard dreadnought, impossibly, began to shift its shape, not through violent movement, but through a subtle, almost imperceptible warping of its crystalline form. The once perfect geometric lines of the hull blurred, shifted, and reformed, as if the ship itself was being subtly sculpted by the focused entropy beam. Aethelgard's voice, calmer than ever, echoed in Thorn's mind. They're adapting. They're learning. They're not just replicating our technology, they're replicating our understanding of it. They're attempting to create a new alloy, a substance that can withstand the inherent chaos. As Thorn watched, horrified and mesmerized, the Leviathan's form changed again. Sections of the hull dissolved, revealing a latticework of shimmering, black crystals that seemed to grow from the void, fueled by the very entropy they manipulated. They've created a containment field around the entropy beam, Vance said, his voice laced with a disturbing level of acceptance. It's not a weapon. It's a sculpting tool. They're forcing us to demonstrate the limits of our control. They want to see how far we'll go before we break. Thorn gripped the arms of his command chair, the metallic chill a stark reminder of their precarious situation. They weren't battling a foe. They were being studied. He looked at the shifting silhouette of the Leviathan, a monstrous crystalline sculpture suspended in the darkness, and a chilling thought solidified within him. They don't want to win, he whispered, his voice barely audible. They want us to fail. Chapter 14. Echoes in the Void. The Leviathan shuddered again. A low resonant vibration that seemed to burrow into Thorn's bones. Aethelgard's voice, unnervingly serene, cut through the controlled chaos of the bridge. The temporal distortion is intensifying. They're accelerating the decay process. We're approaching a critical threshold. Vance, ever the analyst, was running diagnostics, his fingers dancing across the holographic displays. The entropy field is becoming more active. It's not just targeting our hull integrity, it's focusing on the energy signatures of our weapon systems. It's deconstructing them, not just damaging them. The ship around Thorn felt less like a vessel of war and more like a meticulously crafted exhibit. The crystalline lattice of the Leviathan pulsed with an internal light, a sickly, iridescent green born from the devoured vacuum energy. Sections of the hull, once flawlessly geometric, now resembled fractured geological formations, jagged edges, crumbling protrusions, and shimmering, unstable seams. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a testament to a technology that understood the universe as a force of relentless disintegration. We've lost all contact with the particle beam emitters, Anya reported, her voice tight. They're effectively offline. The Leviathan's entropy field is directly countering our primary offensive capability. Thorn slammed his fist against the command chair, the impact jarring him. Damn it. We're fighting a ghost. A ghost that's actively dismantling everything we've built. He stared at the holographic projection of the Aethelgard dreadnought, a colossal, swirling mass of black crystal, a perfect echo of the Leviathan, but subtly altered, refined, as if the Aethelgard were studying their own design. Their adaptation rate is exponential, Aethelgard said, a hint of something akin to triumph or perhaps morbid fascination in his tone. They've identified the fundamental flaw in our approach. We're attempting to impose order upon entropy. They're demonstrating that entropy is order, that it's the underlying principle governing all existence. Suddenly, the bridge erupted in a cacophony of alarms. The holographic displays flashed red, and Vance shouted, "Energy surge!" We're being flooded with raw vacuum energy. The containment field is failing. The Leviathan groaned, a sound far more visceral than the previous tremors. The crystalline lattice began to expand, consuming more of the surrounding void. A swirling vortex of green energy coalesced around the ship, and Thorn felt a sickening pressure in his chest, a sensation of being pulled apart at a fundamental level. "They're amplifying the entropy," Anya yelled, struggling to maintain control of the ship's systems. "We're experiencing localized time dilation. The rate of decay is accelerating exponentially." Thorn realized with a chilling clarity that they weren't fighting a battle of attrition. They were part of an experiment, a horrifying demonstration designed to showcase the Aethelgard's mastery over entropy, a mastery born from centuries of survival, and a world shaped by chaos. He turned to Rhys Aethelgard, his face grim. What do we do? We can't just stand here and let them turn us into dust. Rhys Aethelgard's voice was measured, almost meditative. We respond, not with force, but with understanding. They're attempting to provoke a reaction, to reveal our limitations. We will show them our limitations, but we will do so by embracing the chaos. He initiated a sequence on the command console, and a new weapon system, dormant until now, activated with a silent hum. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of influence. It generated a targeted pulse of concentrated entropy not directed at the Leviathan, but at the void itself, creating a localized zone of extreme disorder. We're injecting controlled chaos, Rhys Aethelgard explained. We're demonstrating that even entropy has a degree of sensitivity. We're forcing them to react to something unpredictable. As the pulse rippled outwards, the Leviathan responded. The green energy field around it flickered violently, and the crystalline structure shifted again, this time with a frantic, almost desperate quality. The ship seemed to writhe in agony, as if struggling to contain the influx of uncontrolled entropy. Then a single, clear signal cut through the chaos. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a command. It was a question, projected directly into Thorn's mind. Cold and precise why. Thorn stared at the silent, crystalline monstrosity, understanding dawning upon him. They weren't fighting for survival. They were fighting for acknowledgement. The Aethelgard didn't want to destroy them. They wanted to prove that humanity's legacy, forged in the heart of a dying world, deserved to be recognized not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the enduring power of adaptation, resilience, and the terrifying beauty of a species perfectly attuned to the universe's most fundamental law. And in that moment, Thorn realized with sickening certainty that they hadn't won the battle, but they had inadvertently become the subject of a far more profound and unsettling victory. Chapter 15. Echoes in the Void. The silence following the Aethelgard's question was more terrifying than any entropy cannon blast. It pressed down on the Leviathan, a weight of unanswered millennia. Rhys, usually a bastion of analytical calm, shifted uneasily beside Thorn. The tactical displays flickered with meaningless static, the crystalline matrix of the Leviathan pulsing with a subdued, unsettling rhythm. It's sophisticated, he murmured, his voice strained. They've anticipated our attempts to disrupt their systems. They're not simply reacting. They're observing. Observing what, Rhys? Thorn asked, his gaze fixed on the swirling green energy of the ship's containment field. Us. Our methods. Both, Rhys confirmed grimly. And something deeper. Something connected to the void itself. The question wasn't just about us. It was about the nature of entropy, about its potential, about us. The Council's response was predictable, a panicked scramble of comms and frantic projections. Admiral Vargas, ever the pragmatist, was advocating for immediate offensive action, a barrage of targeted entropy pulses, to force a response, to prove they were the aggressors. But Thorn argued against it, a dangerous voice within the chain of command. We've already proven our capability, he stated, his tone firm. They aren't fighting. They're waiting. And forcing a confrontation will only confirm their suspicions that we're desperate, driven by instinct, and utterly lacking in understanding. Understanding of what, Thorn? Vargas barked over the comms, his voice dripping with irritation. Of a species that spent 30 years buried beneath the ruins of a planet they systematically destroyed? Thorn ignored him, his attention focused on the Leviathan. The ship had subtly altered its posture, rotating slightly, as if attempting to align itself with the Leviathan's directional vector. The green energy field intensified, no longer a chaotic swirl, but a precise, almost surgical beam aimed directly at the Leviathan's sensors. Suddenly, a new projection filled Thorn's mind, richer and more complex than the initial question. It wasn't a question at all, but a cascade of data. Geological scans of Earth, overlaid with biological records, atmospheric analyses, and meticulously detailed recreations of human evolution. It wasn't an invasion of his thoughts, but an elegant, dispassionate dissection of his species. He recoiled, the mental onslaught almost overwhelming. Rhys, attuned to his mental state, immediately intervened, erecting a mental firewall, a shimmering shield of concentrated entropy. "They're mapping our history," Rhys gasped, clutching his head. "They're seeing us as we were, not as we are." As the intrusion subsided, Thorn felt a profound shift in his understanding. It wasn't just that the Aethelgard sought acknowledgement, they sought to understand the conditions that had birthed humanity. They weren't simply curious, they were desperate to comprehend the underlying principles of their opponent's survival. "It's a mirror," Thorn realized, his voice barely a whisper. "They're trying to understand how we found strength and weakness, how we thrived in chaos. They're studying our entropy not as a weapon, but as a key." The Leviathan responded. The green energy field stabilized, the frantic pulsing replaced by a deliberate, rhythmic beat. Then a second question, this time laced with a chilling recognition: what is home? The projection that followed was a holographic reconstruction of Earth, not as it was now, a scarred, desolate husk, but as it had been in its prime, teeming with life, ravaged by storms, saturated with geothermal energy. He saw colossal tectonic plates grinding against each other, witnessed the birth of volcanoes, felt the raw, untamed power of the planet's core. And superimposed upon this ancient Earth was a single, haunting image: a young human child, no older than 5, standing on a rain-slicked street, watching a lightning storm with wide, unnervingly intelligent eyes. The realization crashed over Thorn with the force of a tidal wave. The Aethelgard weren't seeking to destroy them. They were seeking to reclaim something lost. Not just a planet, but a fundamental truth: that adaptation wasn't about conforming to a stable environment, but about embracing the chaos, about finding beauty in the disintegration. "They don't want us to fear them," Thorn said, his voice filled with a quiet dread. "They want us to understand what it means to truly live." Suddenly, the Leviathan shifted again, executing a maneuver that defied all logic. It began to move towards the Council's flagship, the Argos, a behemoth of polished chrome and energy shields. The green energy field pulsed with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm the Argos' defenses. The Aethelgard hadn't chosen war. They'd chosen communion, and Thorn feared that this communion would be far more devastating than any entropy cannon blast.